In the last dungeon ranking video, there were no set parameters for how I was ranking the dungeon, so I ended up saying a lot of things like, oh, this one's unique, or I like the way this one looked, or it's nostalgic. So today we're going to be adding 3 parameters and going forward for the next tiers of dungeons as well. Those being story, aesthetic, and layout. So for each dungeon, we're going to give it a score 1 out of 10 for each of those 3 areas, and then it'll end up with a final score of 3 to 30 maximum. So today we're starting with tier 2 dungeons, and there are 8 of them, so we'll start there. To start off our list, we have the Bat Cave, and this one is a fairly standard dungeon. So first of all, story. How does the story go? There's bats in a cave. I'm pretty sure that's it, and there's a lost miner too. So story, we're going to give that a 5 out of 10 because that is the precedent right in the middle, very average. Gets a little bit of extra. Instead of a 4, I gave it a 5 because of the lost miner that you actually find in the cave. Adds a little bit of depth to the cave. And aesthetic, also standard cave. Caves do look nice in this game. Still going to give it a 5 because it's in the middle. And finally, layout. This is the reason that this one's going to be in 8th place, because for me personally, the layout is just one large room. So you have to walk in a circle, and if you miss maybe 1 or 2 bats or spawners, you have to walk all the way back to the other side of the room. So there's a lot of backtracking. There is one redeemable quality of this dungeon though, that it has kind of an edge over all the others, and that's the boss actually. The boss looks really cool compared to a lot of the other bosses on this list. So it's not terrible, but it's definitely not one that I enjoy that much. Next up is one of the probably biggest upsets on the list. I know a lot of people like Sweetwater Climb, but compared to all the others, I couldn't put it higher than 7. Yes, it does look really good. It's beautiful, right? It's got the waterfall and the bridge, and it's snowy. The only problem is, even with that, despite it looking so cool, the skyboxes are a little weird. It doesn't feel so immersive. It seems like a very maybe early made dungeon, and you can tell the layout too, which we're going to do this out of order, but the layout is very simple too. You go straight, turn left, turn right, and you're done. So the layout, I'm going to give it a 5 because it's an average layout. Aesthetic is also going to be a 5 because while parts of it are beautiful, parts of it do look maybe unfinished. And story-wise, the Bixies stole some sarsaparilla and you have to get it back. So it has a story, so we'll give it a 5 for that. If it has a story, it automatically gets a 5. If it doesn't have a story, it gets lower, and then if the story is good, it'll be higher, but most of them aren't spectacular as far as story is concerned. But yeah, sorry if you really like Sweetwater Climb. Here's a case in point with weak stories. Arachnia's lair, the story is there's a spider and you have to kill her because she's a spider. And that's it. You don't want her to expand her lair, so that's a 4 for story. But where this one does excel over the other 2 is its aesthetic, the way it looks. So Briarwood is a unique setting that we haven't seen so far from these tier 2 dungeons. And there's a lot of interesting places in this dungeon where you kind of go up on hills and you can see far ahead of you, and it looks really cool, like these vistas that you get in this dungeon that aren't in any other dungeon that I can think of up to this point. So it gets a 7 for the way it looks. Layout, while the layout is responsible for the reason I like the way it looks, the layout is kind of long. So it's one long straight tunnel basically in a valley. Pretty average, 5 for layout with a total of 16 points. Number 5 is High Road Hijinks. This one and Danger Peaks are very similar, so it was kind of hard to rank them. They're very close next to each other. They have the same points actually. 5s for story, 6 for aesthetic, 6 for layout. but they're definitely different. I had to watch the videos of them both for a few times before I could see. But basically, High Road Hijinks is hooligans. So you probably remember Mac or whatever, I don't even remember his name, from Tavern Cellar. It's the same boss here. No story besides the hooligans are bad, so fight them. However, it does get a 5 for story instead of a 4 just because there's this conversation you have with one of the mini bosses, Colin. And then later in the dungeon, the main boss will bring Colin up. So there's like a little bit of a side story there, a little bit of hooligan lore, if you will. So that kind of adds a little to the story. Aesthetics, it's basic. It's just a wilds area, but it is really, really nice looking. And there's these little log bridges you walk over. It's so cool to me. I have to give it a 6. Layout as well is, it's not a straight line. It's kind of windy, but interesting nonetheless. So 17 points total. And while we're here, I may as well just rank number 4 as well, because Danger Peaks is very, very similar. I don't know if that's possible to rank 2 at the same time, but I'm gonna do it. So Danger Peaks 5 for story as well. It's just ninjas, no really background, but there is some dialogue in the dungeon that I unfortunately couldn't read because this video is too blurry. This is the only video I could find from the dungeon, but it looks like there's some stuff going on. And I guess this would count in story too, but the boss has like a shadow clone ability, which is unique. You don't just hit the boss until it dies. There's a little bit of layering to the boss, which is interesting. And aesthetically, it's cool, similar to Hijinks where you're on a mountain. There's a little bit of snow this time too. And the layout is very unique. Lots of like side areas that you don't even need to go down. For example, the boss, you go straight, but you can turn left or right, I was noticing. So I guess that's some creativity points. 5, 6, 6, also 17 points. This next one is a bit of a nostalgia goggles pick. I actually totally forgot about it until someone mentioned it to me after I'd made this list, and then it ended up going in number 3. But Sandscale Oasis, Sunstone Valley, one of my favorite areas in the game. This dungeon I did a lot as a kid, but then when I went back and watched the video, it didn't like stand out as much as I thought. I thought I was going to put it at number 1, but then after watching the video, I had to be honest with myself. It's fairly average, a little bit above average and everything, but it's not spectacular. So story-wise, it's got a 2-dimensional story, which is more than a 1-dimensional story, where the Cactus Jake, why did I say sarsaparilla? Cactus Jake is being a bad guy, and he's controlling the oasis, which is causing the lizard people to go crazy. So that kind of explains why first you're fighting the lizard people, and then at the end you end up fighting the cactus bandits and Cactus Jake. So the story has some effort put into it, so we'll give it a 6 instead of a 5. Aesthetically, like Briarwood, there's no other desert dungeons, level 2 dungeons, so we'll give it a 6, but other than that, it's pretty bland, except for the oasis kind of in the middle, and then like the boss area looks really cool. But other than that, it's just a desert. And the layout is the same, where I would say it's pretty bland, pretty normal, but it gets a little bit of extra points from the oasis, which is like a circle in the middle, and the boss area. So I guess that's aesthetic and layout. Anyways, that's 18 points total. This next one came as the biggest surprise to me personally, because this is one I don't remember at all. I had to look up a video of it, and after I watched the video, I was like, I still don't remember that. But this one is super, super cool actually. So first of all, the story actually has you go into like a text box with the boss, which I don't know if that happens at all, like in any other dungeon. I guess we'll see going forward if they did that any other time, but I forget her name. But the boss, you actually talk to her like 3 times. The story itself wasn't super crazy, but that's just that was pretty incredible to me that you talk to her a few times and then fight her at the end. I'm going to give it a 7. I know I wasn't able to provide too many details on that. I promise I did research and I forgot to write it down. I just thought it was cool that you actually talked to the boss. Aesthetically, I was going to put this one relatively low, but because of the way the compact and small layout of the dungeon, it actually turns out that there's a lot more attention to detail, it seems like. For example, compared to the Batcave, which is number 8 on this list, it was so open and big that it seemed like there wasn't very much detail, because it was just such a big open room. But this one is the opposite, where even though it's a cave, it's compact, so there's lots of like hooks and like fence posts and lamps and stuff, and it just gives a really immersive kind of experience there. And this goes straight into layout as well, so 6 points for aesthetic. And layout, the reason it's so compact is because after you talk to the boss, she teleports you to a small room, like a tunnel. And you basically complete it, you fight the bad guys, and then she talks to you again and teleports you to a second room. So you're basically making your way through this small linear area, but super cool. It's not one area, you have to go to multiple little areas. And also, one last point, the little coup de grace here is that during the boss fight, she has medics, I guess. So they appear during the boss fight and they'll heal her if you don't take them out, which is unique as far as boss fights go too. So I feel like this Hobgoblin treasure trove had a lot of effort and thought put into it. So we're going to give it 22 points total, 7, 6, and 9. Finally, Den of Secrets at number 1. This is probably one of the easiest number 1 picks, the least controversial. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone would agree Den of Secrets is one of the best tier 2, if not one of the best dungeons ever. But this one was pretty easy. Like, before I even made the list, I knew this was going to be number 1. Because, first of all, I could just go on all day about the story. So it's even got its own comic book because of the story being so good and immersive. For example, everything in the dungeon connects to the story. You can see like the dialogue from the NPCs, like the prisoners, they're afraid. They don't want to be turned into shamblers, or the shamblers, I can't remember what they say, but they say stuff about the story. And even the fairies, they're like, you can't leave this place alive. So the dialogue from the NPCs really ties into the story, and all the decorations and the boss it's just, the story is incredible. I'm not going to run through the whole story, but you can watch through the dungeon later if you want to get a rundown of what happens there. And that's a 10. That's going to be an easy 10 for story. It's not like a AAA movie story, but for Free Realms, it's one of the most in-depth stories for a dungeon there is. Aesthetics, we're gonna can't talk. Why can't I speak English? We're gonna give it a 6, because while it is a cave, it is a pretty cave. It's still a cave, so it's better than average, but it's not like stunning. And then the layout, we're gonna give it an 8 too. I think that would include the fake walls. That alone gives it like 2 extra points. And then one other notable area is at the boss fight, you go down this ramp into the like area where the fairy lady is, and it just, I think it's kind of well made how they make it so that you can see the boss before you get to her, and that also looks good, partly for the aesthetic part of the portion too. So 10 points for story, 6 points for aesthetic, 8 points for the layout. And that's 24 points total. That's the highest we've gotten so far. Yeah, let me know. I do usually run my tier list by a few people before I publish them, just to like make sure I'm not totally crazy. But I do want to see what you guys thought differently. Maybe there's a few that a lot of you like that I didn't really talk about. I don't know. Let me know. I'm excited to do number 3, 4, and 5 as well. And yeah. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.